Welcome back to the Badass Reset Club. We are in for a treat today because today we're going to get a little high talking about all sorts of things. Elevation. Like we're going to elevate our minds. We're going to talk about elevating in a physical way. This is going to be one of my favorite topics, and I'm excited for you to join me as we welcome Lisa Thompson to the podcast. Lisa is the owner of an incredible coaching, climbing experience program. Like this woman, when I saw her for the first time a few months ago, I felt like I recognized her. And then I realized why. She is a little famous in my world. She is legendary, and we're about to get to the nitty gritty. So welcome, Lisa, to the podcast.
Oh my goodness, that's so much to live up to. Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to this today. So, like, your story to me is the epitome of what makes someone a badass, because it's a fight story, it's a glory story, it's like everything wrapped into one, but it's also got the physicality that I love. So
Yes.
I'm looking forward to diving in today. For those who have not yet gotten into your realm, into your world, um, I want to just share, that you are a climber and
Mhm.
you are someone who's done some pretty freaking incredible feats. So we're coming to it, everybody. Stay tuned. Let's go to younger Lisa. So
Oh boy.
I just finished your book, Finding Elevation. And I had to text you a few times because I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that we were connected, in a
Yeah.
closer way. Younger Lisa, growing up in a small town in Illinois,
Hmm.
central Illinois. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right in the middle of the state, really.
Yeah. And you had no idea what life had in store for you. You had no idea you were going to be record holders and do things that people can only dream about. I loved the flow of your book, how it would project forward, it would go back, you would call upon experience as a child. Like I just felt like I knew you so well just from reading that. So before we get into climbing, as an author, how did you even put that together? Did you get help on that, or was that just you just spilling everything and it came out so eloquent and beautiful?
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for those kind words, because you never know as an artist how people are going to perceive your work.
Mm,
You put it out there in the world and you hope to convey a certain message or a certain vibe, but you really don't know how people are going to perceive it and internalize it and what they're going to take from it. So thank you for saying that. The process for me was incredibly arduous and lengthy. I very naively thought when I was during my cancer journey, I thought I'll just journal all of this and I can like just turn that journal into a book, right? Like that's how it
mm,
happens. So I had no idea at all. And I will say, I had this thought as a kid, even though I studied engineering in college and have always been sort of techie, I really wanted to write a book when I was very young. But I sort of put that to the side, and there'd been some, very casual stops and starts to do that. But
mm.
it wasn't until I had cancer that I thought, okay, I think I have this very strong desire now to share what I've learned with other people in the hopes that it will somehow make this journey or their journey easier. So that all came together. That idea came together, and I would say the content came together after I had cancer. But the art and the process of writing was still 7 years, a 7 year road for me.
Uh-huh.
So I put together a manuscript, sent it out to anyone I knew in publishing, which was not very many people, got turned down by everyone, sort
Oh,
of, paused it for a while, got frustrated, and other, life, continued forward. And it wasn't until I think the maybe the third time I had heard a rejection that said something like, you have an incredible story, you just don't know how to write. And so I thought, well, I can fix that, right? Like that's like I'm very teachable. And so I took classes at the University of Washington. I studied memoir there for a year. Learned a ton, realized how naive I was at starting out, and still how much more I could develop that skill of writing. But that's really what got me on the path toward a manuscript that was capable of being published. And
Okay.
even then, there were many, many editors and friends and other authors that I'd become friends with who looked it over and made suggestions and offered their input. So it was a very collaborative process. And I also love that the publisher that I worked with in Seattle is owned by women. And so most of the people that I worked with, most of the editors were women. And that really felt like just like I had this very strong group of women who are very smarter than me about writing to guide me and help me and help me stay true to my message.
Yeah, how special.
Very special. Yeah,
Okay, so that makes sense because it's written so well. It makes sense that it was maybe a process. Like you
totally a
said, it was
process.
arduous. So let's talk about too, like you've already mentioned that you've had cancer. Like your journey is not, it's not that nobody goes through this, but the steps that you took to take the steps that you took,
Hmm.
that is what's very unique and not common. So you got cancer. What age were you?
I was 42 when I was
Okay.
diagnosed.
Okay. And like you describe in the book, you went in for a regular routine checkup. You
Yeah.
weren't expecting to get
Yep.
the call back, the news that you got. And your processing of it in the book is, I think that's also really helpful for people who have not gone through this.
Hmm.
It's such a familiar thing for many of us, but that's, I think, a really helpful to read how someone processes it. But will you share with us like what was going through your mind when you were going through cancer?
Yeah. I, at first, like most people, was just in shock. I thought, I have this routine mammogram. I remember being a little bit annoyed at the distraction of even having to have a mammogram. It was like before work one morning, and I thought, I just gotta get to work. I got all the stuff I gotta do. Can we like speed this along? And I knew because I had worked in healthcare and specifically in medical imaging I worked for companies that made imaging devices. So I had this more than pedestrian awareness of the flow in a radiology department, the workflow.
Mhm.
And I knew when the radiologist came back in the room that morning that something wasn't right. It just like clicked that, God, something's like, how could that be that something's not right? And, you know, she was very kind in delivering her message, but I just knew instantly that I had cancer. Even though I did not at that point have a diagnosis, she was just explaining what she had seen and why it was concerning to her. But there was just something in me that shifted immediately that I knew that I had cancer. And as a 42-year-old athlete, that is not something I ever thought that I would have to endure in my lifetime. I was naive enough or arrogant enough to think like that's not something that's going to happen to me, especially at that age. And so I tackled cancer like a project. Like to me, that was the only thing that made sense, that I wanted to build this really strong team of people around me who were stronger and smarter than I was about what was happening and who were fiercely dedicated to this goal of beating cancer.
Mhm.
And I was, ruthless at times. If someone wasn't like strong for me or wanted to sit in this place of like despair and fear, they couldn't be on the team anymore. Like I needed that strength around me because there were times when I couldn't be that strong on my own anymore. And so that is what helped me get through it. And today, I'm cancer free and many years removed from that, but I still get to interact with cancer survivors who are in some cases finding out for the first time that they've been diagnosed with cancer.
Yeah.
And it always amazes me, like just blows my mind how strong and resilient we are as women, especially when something like that happens that we don't even like expect, or it's not at all on our radar. And it also is always very heartwarming for me to see how other women support one another in those circumstances. And truly, like I obviously I would have gotten through it, but it made that journey so much easier for me to have those strong people around me the whole way.
Yeah, you're kind of you seem like you're a tough cookie anyhow. And maybe that's the, the engineering aspect, like more of
Right, right.
that you're of that brain. So like
Yes,
I can see you treating it like a project.
yes,
Yeah. So you had a double mastectomy.
I did.
You
I
did.
had, yeah.
And
Um,
go ahead.
there was, we kept trying to biopsy and biopsy, and we could never find the end of this chain of tumors. And so the general advice was to have a bilateral mastectomy, even though there were only tumors in one breast. And to me, that was a very easy decision. I was just like, get them out of here. Like you're not playing along, you're not following the rules anymore. Gotta go. And then 5 years later, I learned that I had a gene mutation that when I was diagnosed was not associated with breast cancer. So in the end, it was absolutely the right choice to have a bilateral mastectomy because now there's, very little risk of getting breast cancer.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. So getting to like these new levels, these new
Yes.
heights. You're
Yes.
you're going through this, and where is your mind about what is to come?
Well, I'm very stubborn. And so when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in the beginning of 2015, I was just beginning to plan my first climb in the Himalaya. So I had been from 2008 until that point, just once a year, climbing a bigger mountain, pushing myself, becoming more independent, learning about mountaineering. And it was in 2015 that I thought, I think I'm ready to go climb in the Himalaya, which for listeners who aren't aware is this, huge mountain range that bisects Asia. Most of the highest mountains in the world are there. And so for me to be ready to climb one of them was a really big deal. Like I felt like I was, really matriculating as a climber. And I was diagnosed with cancer about 2 months after I made that decision to climb in the Himalaya. And so I was just incredibly stubborn about it. I was like, I'm not, like, I'm going to climb that mountain. And, my doctors were very compassionate and would say, it's still going to be there. What's the worst thing that can happen if it and they, which is the right thing to say. It's the advice I would give someone as well. But being fit enough and healthy enough to climb was really what gave me the motivation on those days that were really hard as I was fighting cancer to
Mhm.
focus on my health and getting ready. And so I went to Nepal as I'd planned that year. Didn't summit that peak, which really was due more to avalanches than to cancer. But I came back from Nepal very clear that mountains are there to teach me things, and that it's up to us to define the lives that we will lead, and that nobody gets to take that away from me. Nobody gets to set those priorities for me. And so that just really sort of exploded this even greater interest in climbing. And I made the decision then to climb Everest shortly thereafter. And my doctors still were like, we don't have a benchmark, right? Like we don't know of another patient, or our peer groups don't have other patients who've done this. So good luck. Here's my cell phone number. Let me know how it goes.
It is extremely unique.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. There's a point where you are you're talking in the book about missing dinners with friends, and you're talking a lot about your dad, and you're talking about like discovering these deep whys. And I
Mhm.
love, like, later in the book, you come to a kind of a precipice of how you found your why and what that why was. Um, but like, this is something that's really important to me when I'm working with someone too, and I'm sure you're the same way with your clients, of like, the why cannot just be a fluffy, like,
No,
off the tip of your tongue. Like, it takes work to figure out your deep why, you know?
absolutely it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for our listeners to get a better understanding too, until they read your story, like, your life changes through divorce, through cancer, through quitting your job,
Mhm.
through all of these things, so that you could go climb the biggest peaks on 7
Right.
continents. Like, wow. This is life changing. It's not just a whim. It's a life changing series of decisions that were made. And so, uh I love, like, I yes, do you want to go to Everest? Do you want to talk about Everest? Because I really can't wait till we get, a little further.
Yeah. Yeah. So I came back from Nepal after that first trip in the fall of 2015. I was diagnosed in February,
Mhm.
and I had not, prior to that point, had much of a desire to climb Everest. I felt like it was very commercial. There were more interesting mountains to climb. And when I came home and after being cancer free for several months, I felt like, why wouldn't you want to climb the highest mountain in the world? Like, that's sort of the pinnacle of everything, figuratively and literally. And so I made the decision then to quit my job because they weren't going to let me take any more time off to go climbing, understandably,
Yeah.
um, and decided to climb Everest. And it really was this series of events after I had cancer that led me to take those steps and to reset my priorities so that I could focus on what I really loved and what made me feel the most authentic and the most fulfilled.
Mm.
And it was a very, looking back, I knew that I was taking the right steps, but I would see the concern in my friends' eyes or my family's eyes when I was like, yeah, I'm going to borrow $50,000, quit my job, get a divorce, and go climb Mount Everest.
Uh-huh.
Which seems totally irrational, and I understand that. And yet in that moment for me, there was no other path I could have taken. It was absolutely logical for me to do those things. And, now with the benefit of hindsight, I know that that set me up to have the life I have today and to have the business that I've started and to be able to now help people the way that I'm able to because of those experiences. And so, it's a funny, it may not be the right word, but to see that look on other people's faces who deeply care about you, who think you're making a gigantic mistake,
Mhm.
and to be able to move forward anyway with what you in your heart know is right for you
Mhm.
is courageous. And it was not always easy for me to take those steps. And I knew that I was disappointing people and in some cases hurting people, but I was being true to what I knew my path needed to be.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's pretty profound.
Mhm.
There's something that was said in the book that, um, you know, some people were really worried about
Yeah.
your wellness. And you referenced, like, I don't want to die doing what I love, which a lot of
Hmm.
people say, you know, but you said you didn't want to die doing what you love, because then that would, um, maybe you can tell it better, but like, that would mean that that wasn't so meaningful to, that they weren't so
Right.
meaningful in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I really, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure why it bothers me when someone dies. I'm like, he died doing what he loved. I'm like,
Yeah.
but I would rather be alive. I'm
Yeah.
sure he would rather be alive. It
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
negates, I think, the value of what you're doing when you say that.
I get that.
And I had to accept that that was an outcome of my endeavors. That was an outcome of the choices I was making. And, you know, there were climbs after Everest where that was even more
Mhm.
profound and likely, frankly, that I could die. But I had to accept that I had done everything I could and that I would always be as safe as I could be. And
Mhm.
yet that could be a potential outcome of climbing. And it was even more, I think, difficult because when I came back from Everest, my father died of cancer. And knowing that he had just lost his life and I was putting mine in danger unnecessarily was difficult for me to resolve. And I had to ultimately say that, or acknowledge really, that this is the path I am meant to be on. And I would regret not continuing to climb bigger mountains because I know that I need to do this to fulfill something in myself.
Yeah.
And that was very like resonant with me, that there was that sense of drive in order to be more aligned with who I really am.
Mhm. I think somewhere around the part where you were at Kolchak when you hiked in
Yeah.
and that area and these feelings were overwhelming. And I, as someone who's hiked that area and I have a big poster of them
Ah,
in
love
my
it.
office, like I got teary reading that
Mm,
part because it's when you can tie physical beauty with emotional things that you're going through, there's something that's extremely special about that. And many people will understand, it doesn't have to be Kolchak. It can be anything beautiful that they've
yeah,
done and seen, that when you tie that in with an emotion, it leaves a mark
it does leave a
for
mark.
sure.
And um, that day my father had just passed away. He was in Illinois, I was in Washington. And I remember, I mean, it's probably like an animal feels, right? I didn't know what to do. I couldn't yet fly to see him. You know, I had like my flight was booked, but it was going to be a full day before I could get there. And I had lost just this sense of direction.
Mhm.
And the only thing that I knew to do was to be outside. And that hike and that lake is like just like it's one I've seen many beautiful places and it remains one of the most beautiful places to me. And
Same.
so yeah, and and nature to me is just incredibly grounding and healing.
Mhm.
And that was what I needed in that moment. And it
And
became a very
I feel like it calls you too. I feel like
oh
nature
yeah.
is, when you don't know what to do, that's that calling of, yeah, come ground,
Yes.
come
Yeah. I
connect.
didn't know what else to do. I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
nothing else felt right in that moment.
yeah. When did you know that you wanted to do the scariest climb?
So I had this little like thought of doing it many years before I even told anyone. And we're talking about the second highest mountain in the world, K2. And I had heard about it. I actually read a Seattle Times article in 2008 about what is still today the biggest tragedy on that mountain. And sitting on my comfortable patio in July, reading this article about these, 12, I think, mountaineers died when a chunk of ice fell. And I thought, I didn't think I want to climb that, but I remember saving that article. Like, this is something I want to come back to. And then a few years later, as I was getting more confident as a climber, that mountain K2 just really kept coming back to me as this is a mountain that legit climbers climb, right? Like it's not a tourist mountain.
Mhm.
And I wanted, and this goes back to my why. I was still very much about proving my capability. at that moment in my life. And so I thought, well, Everest wasn't enough. Like I climbed that mountain and I didn't get this sense of figuring things out, this profound experience. And so I guess I need to climb something harder. And K2 was the mountain that just kept like circling back to me. But I didn't tell anybody that because it was such a crazy idea that like I didn't know anyone else that had climbed it or even tried to climb it. And my little group of mountaineers talked about like, maybe climbing Mount Everest was like the ultimate goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not confident saying I was going to climb something even harder. And so I kept it to myself, but yet kept studying it, thinking about the gaps between where I was and where I would need to be to safely climb that mountain. And finally, after I climbed Everest and I came back, I felt confident saying that this was to be my next goal. And I had hoped to climb it in 2017, but the team that I had arranged to go with, just everyone backed out except me. And so I had to postpone for a year.
Which is crushing, right? When you have
It was
something in mind.
crushing. Yeah. And it was crushing because in between, it had not been summited by another American woman. And in 2017, that changed.
Mm,
And that was hard for me. It was hard for my ego because, if I'm being 100% honest, that was part of what was driving me.
got it.
And I had to come to terms with that. And today, I don't care anymore because I get so much more satisfaction. Like to me, being the first is not as cool as getting other women to do it too. And
Okay.
that is much more where my energy is today, is supporting other women to climb and to reach their goals in the mountains.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I love that. Your experience when you did get to make this happen with K2.
Yeah.
Was it, am I saying his name correctly? Was it Umar? Umari? Umar?
Yeah. Umar. Yeah.
Umar?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, he said something to you that to me was like, okay, game over. This is this is maybe what I should have told my kids. This is maybe what we should have all been following forever. But he told you not to give up until you were transformed. And to me, that is priceless.
And
Priceless.
to set the stage for this conversation, I was standing outside an Islamabad hotel, like 112 degrees. They're loading all of our bags. We're getting ready to leave Islamabad to start to trek to the mountains. And I just happened to start a conversation with this businessman who's standing next to me. And he's like, what are you doing? And I tell him, and he had been, I think, to K2 base camp or somewhere nearby. And he just randomly said that, don't give up until you're transformed. And I was like, and then he like walked away. I'm like, what? I'm like, hang on. It was like one of the most profound things that anyone's ever said to me. And he said it so like, he just dropped it there.
He was supposed to. He was
Oh,
supposed to say that.
absolutely.
That is, that's unbelievable. Yeah.
And I even emailed him later because he must have given me his business card. And I emailed him and I just wanted to like thank him because, I doubt he realized how much impact his words had on me. And he was still very humble and gracious and was like, great, glad you had a good time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest that I was afraid for you listening to this part.
Thank you.
K2 it's incredibly daunting, I think would be a good word for it.
Mm-hmm.
There's parts like I had to pull out maps and I had to look at different things and Google, and I had so many questions. And at the same time, I was like, I'm a girl who says yes to almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an idea that sounds outrageous and awesome, I'm in. This was like the first time in my life that I was like, ooh, that might be too much for me. It scared me to like read this and go through this journey even though I know what the outcome was, I was still like having like, oh, so what can you share with us of going through that harrowing, amazing journey? Like, what stands out to you of what you want people to know about it?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. And I, by the way, get that a lot when I speak. People will be like, I know you're still alive, but I'm sitting there sweating. My palms are sweating hearing you talk about this
Interesting. Okay.
mountain. So you're in good company. Um, I the first thing is that, you know, if I thought people were uncomfortable, people in my life that I cared about were uncomfortable with me climbing Everest, like multiply that by a billion when I started to tell people that I was been prepared to climb K2. And there were people who just, like my climbing coach stopped working with me, for example, because he thought that I was making an egotistical decision that was way out of my skill set. And I knew that people were afraid for me and thought that I was doing something reckless. And yet, there was just this part of me that knew I was doing the right thing, that knew that even though that mountain was scary, that I had what it took to climb it safely. And it was very hard. I wasn't able in those moments to really articulate to people why I needed to do it. And, you know, they had to sit with that fear for me while I was climbing. And that was hard. That was hard for me to carry that, to know that I was making this decision that felt so right for me and scary, and that it was creating this turmoil in other people's lives that I cared about. But just like I said earlier, I also knew, I often think about the corollary of a situation. What if I don't do this? How will I feel about that in a week, in a year, in 10 years? And I knew that I would regret not trying. And I had to tell myself when I left Seattle, I remember still feeling conflicted about whether I was doing the right thing and whether that what I thought was the core of me saying you can do this was, you know, was not something I should be listening to. And I remember just promising myself that I would do my best every day and I would never climb above my ability. And that for me was finally what helped me sort of settle into that decision and move forward more confidently with it. But it was hard. It was really hard to know that I was doing something that was hurting other people, and yet that thing felt so right to me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
At what point did you on this on K2, at what point did you say, I'm going to be okay, this is fine, I've got this?
Oh, not until I got back. Like there was never a moment where I felt like, okay, cool, like this is fun. I have deep respect for many mountains, and that mountain in particular, like reverence for that peak. And I also felt like it was trying to kill me the whole time.
Mm.
And I would even joke like, you know, I had summited and you think you're like out of harm's way, and we're walking back to the village that we can catch a flight from, and the glacier is like melting and there's these huge rivers of icy water that like if you fell in you would still die. Like,
Oh my
and
gosh.
like you're not actually on the mountain really anymore. And even flying from back to Islamabad, there was this outrageous turbulence so bad that the flight attendant fell down in the aisle. I'm like, geez, can I just and I really having that relationship with mountains is important to me. And I think listening to them is very important, and that respect is very important. And I felt like I'm really trying to be respectful. Like I'm really trying to do all the right things. Can you just
Mhm.
please? And there was a mantra I had at one point, like, thank you for keeping me safe. I would just on repeat keep saying that over and over, which I think helped me to just like settle into almost this dialogue with the mountain that I'm not trying to conquer you. I want to be here respectfully. Please keep me safe.
Mm.
And I will forever be grateful that it worked out the way that it did.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that you said that you know, you witnessed someone dying out there.
Right, right.
How long of an inner dialogue did you have over that of like was that a place where you thought maybe I shouldn't?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think it should. I think it should give you pause
Mhm.
and reflection. Um, and the thing that I thought the most was he didn't make a mistake. He was doing the exact same thing that I'm doing. He left his family with the same hopes and dreams that I have. There's no difference between him and me. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mhm.
And it does make you reassess, like, why am I even here? So I feel strongly that mountaineering is a very selfish endeavor, and I'm doing what I can to change that for me, and I mean in my own way. But no one really benefits, right? If I stand on the top of a mountain or not, who cares? And so it really I spent so we the accident happened. We climbed to the next camp and spent the whole next day as a team wrestling with what we should do and how we could make the mountain safer. And at some point, I had to accept that this is what I signed up for. And I knew that when I left Seattle, nothing had changed. It's just that I was witness to it happening in front of me.
Uh-huh.
And my dreams and my goals and my abilities were still the same. And we all chose to continue climbing, but it was a very, very difficult time.
I'm sure. Yep.
Yeah.
And like I tried to put myself in that, just pause. What would I do? What would be going through my head? How would I handle that? Yeah, that was tough. Tough to read. And I
Yep.
can't imagine how tough that was for you. Okay, we got to get to girl stuff.
Okay.
You get your freaking period. On
Yes.
K2 at where were you?
I was at, gosh,
You were like
probably
to me
20.
on a ledge somewhere
Oh,
where like you
I was at, I think, 25,000 feet.
uh,
And I wish someone, this is my just very short rant about studying women's bodies, like, because I'm not the only woman who has said this happens. And I found no data other than our bodies are just at stress, and cycles change, hormones respond to that stress. And so
Mhm.
sometimes our periods will start when they're unexpected. But it had like 8 or 10 hours of climbing, dive into the tent with a guy, because I was at that point the only woman on the team. And in those circumstances, it's easier to pee inside the tent than outside the tent. So you use a plastic bottle to pee in, and I peed, and it was blood because my period had just started. I was just like,
There's
what else?
one word I would have for that.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I wonder too if there's something with elevation that affects, if there's something in the body that
Totally.
we'll have to do a little more digging on
I
that.
yeah, I wish people would study it more, because there are a lot of women climbing and climbing higher and higher. And I've heard other women say as well
Yeah,
that your period can start when you don't expect it. So it's stress, elevation, nutrition. I mean, it could be a lot of different things. So
of
if you're a
course.
climber, always carry a couple tampons with you. Or
Carry a
if you climb
tampon,
with
everybody.
women, yes,
Yeah, because
always.
someone gave you one
Someone
somewhere
gave me
that
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you also, at some point were assessing your body, and I love this because like women will never ever escape like the thoughts of how do my hips look? Am I shrinking? Am I growing? Like we're always just so obsessed with
Hmm.
assessing our bodies. And I think that we can do it in a healthy way, and I think that we need to do it often, right?
Yeah.
Like of course we
Yep.
need to be doing checks and stuff. but it's to me like you mentioned this, and I went from this place of this fairy tale stuff I can't fathom being in to like bringing me right back in of, oh, yep, no, I could totally see that. Like, how are my hips doing? Is my body changing? You know, like it
Mhm.
was, and I know it wasn't for vanity. You were more from the perspective of like, am I taking care of my nutritional needs? Am I losing muscle
Right.
mass? That kind of stuff. But it still like brought me back to this is such like, I do not think men are so
No.
obsessed with their physical body as we are.
Yep. Yeah, I
And
guarantee you no man was making those assessments before and after they climb. I'm
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. And I I just thought that in conjunction with getting your period, I was like, we women must stick together and really carry each other through because we are all in the same boat no matter what. It might
Yes.
just look a little bit different. So
Yes.
that was pretty wild, Lisa.
Yes.
That part.
Yeah, I think we all have challenges climbing, and I'm of course biased as a woman, but I feel like sometimes just the shit we have to put up with in
Yeah.
those harsh environments, and I'm making the choice to be in those environments. And often they're much more challenging, even just from the perspective of gear and clothing is
Yeah.
not made for women. It's getting better, but still not, it's hard for me to find a jacket that fits me or a backpack that fits me well because I'm small framed. And there's so many things that we could do to make it easier and more accessible for people who aren't men.
I have a feeling you're on a mission. Okay, so I have two more questions.
Yes.
You wrote a letter to yourself.
Yeah.
Um, you wrote something in the letter that I might have written to myself.
Oh, tell me.
You told yourself that you are a badass, and I literally cried reading that because I have written letters to myself on New Year's Eve to get them
Aw.
the next year from someone, and those are the things I write to myself of,
Yep.
but like to me, this letter is where is the letter now? Is it somewhere
It's in
special?
my desk drawer. Yeah, I
Okay.
still
It's not
keep it.
framed on the wall.
No. Oh, that's a really good idea. That's a good idea. I might have to do that, but I still have it.
Tell everybody where your letter was when you left. Where did you have your letter?
So I So the letter I carried with me when I climbed was in my coat pocket, in my
Okay.
down jacket pocket. I wrote another letter and I kept it under my desk in case I died.
Mhm.
And that letter was, I assumed, probably my sister would find it. Um, yeah, it was important to me that she knew why I was climbing and how much mountains mean to me.
Is that letter still under your desk or did it go away?
I still have it. It's no longer under my desk, but I still have that letter as well. Yeah.
And I just can't even imagine what that's like to write that letter. But also, none of us know our time. And so, like, to have a letter written is also wow. Wow.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was as you said, not easy to write, but also felt necessary for me. It felt like the responsible thing to do. But your point is a really good one because you never know, right? What day will be your last day. And maybe
Right.
we should all have a letter for people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. We'll come up with a good name for that.
Okay.
Hashtag something. Okay, so you are now coaching, and you're not coaching just women, correct? You're coaching both men and
Great.
women.
All people of all
Yes.
levels, genders, yeah,
Yep.
abilities, aspirations.
To conquer their goals and to do these climbs, and you're also leading climbs, which someday I'll get in on.
Okay.
One of
Love
yours
to
I'll
have
get
you.
in on.
Looking forward to that.
That would be super amazing. You have a podcast,
Yep.
and your podcast is called
It's called Finding
Finding
Elevation,
Elevation,
just like
just
the
like the
title
book.
of my book. Yep.
Yes.
And we talk, part of my mission now is to just share what I've learned as a climber,
Mhm.
in a way that supports other climbers, especially those that are new or learning or have just signed up to do something that seems audacious and big, to
Mhm.
just disseminate information so that hopefully that path is a little bit easier for them than it was for me and for the people that came before them. So that's what the Finding Elevation podcast is all about.
That's fantastic. Where can people find you if they're interested in climbing with you or getting in on your coaching or just learning more about you?
Yeah, so probably the best place just to get to know me a little bit better is Instagram, and that handle is Lisa Climbs.
Okay.
And my company is called Alpine Athletics. And we coach people, as I said, who, whether you want to go hike around Mount Rainier or climb Kilimanjaro or you're headed to K2. And that website is alpineathletics.net. And then my personal website is lisaclimbs.com. And so
I
please reach out with questions. Like, I love, just even if it's just a conversation or you want to know how to get started, love sharing that information with people.
Wonderful. Okay, last question. Lisa, what makes you feel like a badass?
I feel like a badass when I do something that I didn't think I could do. Yeah, that seems scary and audacious. And I look back and I realize I did it. And that's what drives me to keep growing, I think. Like, that's continually evolving and pushing myself is a really big deal for me. And without that, I wouldn't feel like myself.
Beautiful. I really appreciate you sharing your heart with us today.
Ah,
Some of your adventures. Everybody, you need to get Lisa's book. You need to go and learn more about her and get on her website. You'll see some of her incredible pictures. They're just breathtakingly beautiful. So go check out Lisa. I'll make sure to have everything linked in the show notes. Is there anything
perfect.
that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share or wanted
No,
people to
I
know about?
think, yeah, I think that's it. I think it's important that we all just keep setting goals and pushing ourselves and doing the things that make us feel like a badass.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Lisa. Keep carrying on, keep inspiring everybody. It's absolutely incredible to learn about these things, and you are super inspirational. So, thank you so much for tuning in today, everybody. Make sure to check out the show notes, get the links, and we'll see you next time in the Badass Reset Club.